Anthony, and he's seen a lot. And he is at Barnes and Thornburg here in San Diego, and we're gonna do a deep dive on really any way to structure early stage financing, how to really speaking to the founder of what are some pitfalls and what to avoid, and we're going to dive in. And I'm really excited. And the most important thing about the office hours today is this is not a founder series. This is ask questions. This is free and really cheap advice that you can get from Anthony. So if you have a complex legal question or you're going through something, chat it in or pop it in, and we'll do our best to help you guys through that. Anthony will. So before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to the community, and then I'll introduce Anthony, and we'll go from there. So as everybody knows, we are pumping out a ton of content with Naturally San Diego. We have our coffee and convos coming up on Thursday, February 25th. So mark your calendars for that. That's for all the members to come in and meet and connect with everybody. And our team does a really good job at facilitating that. We have our next founder series, which is going to be really exciting with Jimbo Somek. He's the founder of Jimbo's. For those that are from San Diego, it's just a legendary natural food store, and he has an amazing story, and he's so humble, and we can't wait to share that. And then we are also having another office hours next month, and we're going to be chatting with two early stage investors, Greg from Venice Brands and Philip from Cambridge Companies. Anthony will be joining us on that too. And we're going to talk about the difference between growth and profitability and these two competing ideas that different investors have different ideas of. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. And that's Friday, March 19th. So mark your calendar for that as well. So good content coming in the pipeline, and just excited to be here helping everybody out in the community. And as always, if you remember, join our Slack community. We try to be as active as possible in there. And it's a great way to connect. Just recently, a friend of mine from 10 years ago I haven't seen, she joined, and it was just a terrific connection. So join our Slack community. All right, just quickly, thank you to all of our sponsors. The sponsors are growing every month, and we just have, like I said, I look at this list and I get so excited because we have such an all-star list of great companies in San Diego, and everybody's stepping up to the table and supporting what we're doing here. And so just a thank you to our platinum, gold, and bronze sponsors. So appreciate everybody helping out as we build this community and nurture it in San Diego. Okay, let's dive in. We got Anthony. Anthony, I will give you a short introduction, but I know the time is just, this is not enough to cover what you've done, but Anthony has seen it all, everybody. He has worked in private equity and in capital for 2 decades now, and he's worked under a $150 billion assets under management firm, private equity, distressed debt, and now he's worked on other sides of it, which is advising venture funds and raising capital. And so he sees the venture side of it, he sees the big legal structure side, and he sees the founder side of it. And today, what we really want to try to focus on is the founder side of it, right? Is, from the founder's perspective, what are common mistakes or errors that Anthony is seeing as he's negotiating on the other side that it's just messy or needs to be cleaned up? And we're going to cover options, and we'll cover structure and what's the best way to do it. So Anthony, kick us off. I guess the first question I have for you, and people are popping in now and everybody can ask questions, is, what are common errors you see in when founders are going out to raise capital? What are common mistakes?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and thanks for having me, everyone. I think I'm really proud to be a member of San Diego in particular, but also this community. I think it's a great group, and I'm excited to get to meet some of you. I think there's a wide variety of things that are kind of on the non-material side, things that are more material. Obviously, from the legal side, we tend to be focused on some of the documentation mistakes. So I think really not understanding some of your corporate governance structure, some of your organizational documents could be putting you on your back feet when it comes to going out and talking to investors. I think in particular, you mentioned options, not having a plan when it comes to how to compensate employees, how to compensate yourself, really when it comes to moving forward and documentation on that front. And I think a sense for really what your expectations are for your potential capital partners going forward. I think, asking questions about who the right fit is going forward. Do you want someone who's going to be on the board, someone who's a little more hands-off, someone who's making introductions to other potential capital partners? I think having a really thorough discussion with your early advisors and your other co-founders about those particular questions is important, and having a sense for what you want, because you always want to be kind of in the position where you're driving the process. I know it's sometimes difficult thinking that you could do that when you're dealing with a VC or maybe a sophisticated angel investor. But I think, they want that pushback. They want that back and forth when it comes to, you
Right.
having a proposal. So I like, I tend to be mostly on the investor side, but when I'm on the company side, we like to have our own term sheet. So, I know investors will come in and they'll drop their term sheet on you, but I would like to start with, let's at least get what we want on paper
Yep.
and have, that start the conversation, as opposed to the other way around where we're then having to push back and whittle back certain rights, or, take back certain things. I like being, even if it's a pretty simple one
Right.
page, having that as a starting point for a discussion is really important, in my opinion.
It's such an interesting, question for you is what percentage of deals you see does the entrepreneur say, here's the term sheet versus, hey, we want to raise capital. We want to raise 5 million. What do you guys think? Right.
Yeah.
What percentage?
Yeah, it's not enough, first of all. So really, I would say it's probably less than 20% of deals where the company is offering up a term sheet. And so I know, some companies obviously, and I think, self-confidence is good. So having that self-confidence to at least put it out there and say, hey, we know you guys may have a standard package, a standard set of terms that you deal with, but we have our own, and here it is. And I think that, that will be well taken, even if ultimately they say, no, we're going to start with ours. Having something to start with is important. So it is, I would say, too few deals starting with this, at least the company having a sense of what they want. And that also kind of helps you narrow down which investors to go out to, right? Because some investors will not fit the parameters that you're looking for, not fit the stage that you're in. And I think that, having a sense for all those things when you're going out to the market is important. Otherwise, you could just kind of be, blown back and forth like a leaf in the fall breeze, if you don't have a good sense of what ties you down and what's important to you.
A fantastic analogy, by the way.
Oh yeah. I just came up with it. I have leaves on my shirt. So
Anybody that's joining the community here as it relates to kind of that fundraising, early stage venture and founder, have any thoughts for Anthony or questions? So if you guys do, just chime in. Anthony, I have a thought. When I'm curious if you've seen a lot of this, is this idea of LLC versus C Corp early stage, and the benefits from the venture side and the benefits from the founder side. And just recently, I was looking at a deal that had small business tax credit, right? Qualified small business stock, and only if you're a C Corp that qualifies. Can you kind of think through that and talk through that? And do you see founders thinking about that? Because that qualified small business stock also applies to the founders too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's a huge tax benefit. I would say it kind of feeds into what we discussed about being ready to have that discussion. So I would say most of the time the default tends to be an LLC structure, or at least that's what the reference point is for most of the founders we work with, just because it's easier to administer, easier to think about governance being in one document in the operating agreement. It's pretty simple, especially if it's a single co-founder or a single, even just a pair of co-founders. It's easy to have all those rights and obligations set forth in one document. And I say that because corporations tend to have a much more broader backdrop of the law around it. And this is getting into kind of law school stuff, but C corporations do have additional rights for shareholders, additional, requirements around having annual meetings for board members, basically things that you have to tick off every year. That LLC agreements, you can basically agree to not do those things in an LLC agreement. So LLCs tend to be easier to administer. C corps tend to be a little bit more difficult to administer, but for that reason, I think investors tend to prefer C corps. And most of the time, when we're working on the investor side, we will actually require a company to convert from an LLC to a C corp before we make the investment, and for a couple of reasons. One is tax, as you mentioned. So having a C corp, obviously, it creates an additional layer of tax. When you have an LLC, everything flows up to the founders. Basically, this is very simplistic, and obviously there's lots of nuance to it. But from an investor standpoint, having the tax sit at the corporate level is much more important than having it flow up to them if they end up, owning equity as opposed to debt. And then also the qualified small business stock issue that you described is a huge tax benefit that you only get if you're a C corp. And I think that does come into play pretty often, actually. So we were working on a deal last year where, we had some pretty um, highly regarded VCs coming in, and they saw, being able to invest in a C Corp with QSBS status is a huge benefit. And it's
Yep.
really one of the main benefits. But that actually requires you to look back a few years before you even start talking to the VC, because you can't have had distributions of shares
Yes.
before the year before. So you kind of have to know, everything has to be lined up in the proper way for it
Yeah.
to work. And you can't go back and kind of paper something up or make it or backdate documents. I mean, at least you shouldn't. It's not a good practice, and I don't recommend it. But I think that idea of kind of starting with the end goal in mind would, knowing that you want to reach out to investors who do care about that status, makes you watch what you're doing from a corporate standpoint much earlier in the process, and you kind of make decisions based on that ultimate goal as opposed to the other way around. So
and
yeah.
for anybody that's interested in that, I would just encourage everybody to Google qualified small business stock. We at Barnana early on got more lucky than smart when we set up as a C Corp, and the first couple rounds you couldn't raise money, and then as we started getting more established, it was an absolute selling point that we were able to use as a negotiating tactic that allowed us to protect our valuation because of the tax advantage of the qualified small business stock. And so it was a freebie just given to us just because we were C Corp. And so
absolutely, yeah, I think investors love it. It's a huge advantage to have and to go to market with. And I think, it's not hard to comply with it, but you could do a foot fault pretty easily, right? Which is, take yourself out of it just by making one mistake. So
we have two similar questions in the flow, and Anthony, I'm actually fired up to see both these that are same. So it's a question of thinking through C Corp to B Corp conversion.
Yes.
The reason I love this question is I did this. It took us 18 months to do it at Barnana, and so I am familiar with the pains of going through it and some of the problems. But have you seen a lot of this, and have you kind of seen some of the challenges?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it really comes down to, in my opinion, kind of clearly defining the mission, right? I think that's ultimately, in my mind, what the distinction is between a B Corp and a C Corp, and thinking about, additional constituencies. So in a C Corp, the model is driving shareholder value, right? And basically your fiduciary duty as a director is it's much more simple, right? It's just driving bottom line profitability of the company for shareholders. In a B Corp, you have much broader considerations. And I think baking those into the corporate governance documents could be pretty complicated. And I think I'm actually 18 months sounds like a pretty reasonable time to have gone through it, but I actually would love to hear more about your experience and having gone through it, because from a legal standpoint, I would say the legal part of it is actually pretty easy.
Yeah.
I think the more difficult part is an operational standpoint and the kind of mission statement, the mission driven question, just from my experience.
Yeah, our big challenge, for what it's worth, is we had a pretty clearly defined mission. But when you're getting vote from majority shareholders on this transition, even though from the beginning we had this, this ethos to it, and so everybody's aligned on that. But there's two factors. It was the newness of it that took a lot of the, maybe less sophisticated investors' awareness of B Corp to get comfortable with it, because there was this question of, okay, can now somebody sue you if you're not following your mission?
Yep.
Right? Does that open up more legal exposure that we just don't want to take on if we don't have to, even though you guys are great and you're doing your mission? But could somebody, a shareholder, say, well, you didn't follow your mission, so we're going to sue you? So that was one, which is actually the easier one to get through, because we just pointed at a ton of other big B Corps. And we're like, look at, there's just not a lot of precedent case law yet, right? And so that makes lawyers nervous, right? Not a lot of precedent case law. And the other one that was a sticking point for us was the voting threshold change. And this is different if you do a Delaware B Corp or a California B Corp, depending on where you want to do it. And the voting threshold was a simple majority as a total to voting per class. And that set off some essentially blockage from certain investors. And we had to say, are we willing to accept that block, right? Because some investors had a majority of a certain class. And that was more of an operational question for us that we had to get over. And so I guess the better answer is, like, the earlier you do it, the better. The later you do it, the harder it gets, because you're essentially giving rights to some investors that may not have purchased those rights when they bought in.
Yep, that's right. And I think based on my experience, I've had a little bit of experience in both California and Delaware, and those are the only two states I've had experience in similar to what you're describing. And Delaware tends to be a little bit easier in terms of the process. Generally as a corporate law regime, Delaware is more accommodating on the company side. And California tends to be a little bit more onerous, but I think on the B Corp side specifically, it seems to be like the law is more well developed at this point in Delaware, so you have more guidance on
And then
what
I
to do.
remember there's also a tax issue there. Like what we did is instead of just changing the corporate structure, we actually set up a new B Corp in Delaware
Mhm.
that fully owned the C Corp.
Yep. Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
I
Basically,
think it cost us like $50,000 in legal fees. Whoever wants to know it, it was
yeah,
ridiculous.
I will say,
But
that's right. It's easier to start as a B Corp if you know that's where you want to go, as opposed
yeah.
to converting later. So that would be my one piece of advice on that front.
So Farzan, apologize if I didn't pronounce your name right. Had a question. Any issues being a C corp in California, but setting up a B corp in Delaware? That's exactly what we did.
Mhm.
We were a California C corporation, and according to counsel, it was easier for us to set up a new B corp in Delaware and then have the assets fully owned. The California C corp assets fully owned by the B corp. So then the governance sat at the B corp level, and we assumed all the assets of the C corp in California.
Yeah,
That was
that seems
easier.
right. Exactly. And you could do basically a tax-free exchange at that point, right? If it's the initial same ownership in both corporations, establishing it's basically like you would think a spin-off, if you take two publicly traded or one publicly traded company, turn it into two, and it's owned proportionally by those same shareholders, there's no tax event. It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So that's how I think of it in terms of not being a taxable event, because that's what you want to avoid, right? We're not trying to pay income tax now on something
Yeah.
that really isn't affecting our ownership. It's just the way we hold the assets. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, very interesting. And I'm actually, the thing I'm excited about is that more and more companies are doing this, because the B Corp
Yes.
structure to me is terrific. And I think that it's a path forward that helps balance out, capital and allocation of capital and capitalism. But your question, Farzan, was curious on what you said of the cost. So for us, it was like $50,000 to do
Mhm.
it. I think we were later stage and just more eyes on it. Um, I think that is probably a big range of what it costs, because every structure is different, and shareholders and notices and collections and the administrative part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the bottom part of the range from what we've seen, we've set up B Corps, and we have not done the conversion, but an initial setup as a B Corp between $10,000 and $15,000. So I would say in terms of the conversion, probably within that range, and 50 being at the top. So and then, but yeah, to your point earlier about it being kind of relatively new regime. So LLCs are also relatively new. It's not as old as a
Yeah.
regime as corporations. So it's interesting how and they're all state creatures of state law, right? So you think about, California being distinct from Delaware, and even the corporate law being distinct in both places when it comes to voting thresholds and things of that nature. It really does matter a lot, thinking about where you want to operate, what your end goal is for an exit, who you want your partners to be, as to what jurisdiction you choose, what form you choose, and then keeping in mind that there are new developments like B Corps, and even potentially developments within the B Corp case law, or within the B Corp statute that could be coming down the pipeline. So it's interesting, and I think that's what keeps lawyers busy. Is these changes are constant, and we have to stay on top of them. But I mean, it makes it an interesting job as well.
Yeah. Another question from Christina. Can you please give some advice on how to find a good CPA? Really worried about doing my LLC taxes correctly without spending a fortune. Seems
Yeah.
like a question that could be a tome forever, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a good CPA in some ways is just as important as having good legal counsel at the beginning, because it really is. And I think the best situation is when your lawyer and your CPA are talking to each other, because everyone has their own unique tax situation. Especially once you start to set up a business, and it is, you're deciding whether it's LLC or corporation, having a CPA, on your bench, who understands the options and who understands what benefits you in particular. If you're going to be basically bootstrapping and continue to work at your current job without necessarily moving over full time to the LLC, or if you're going to be taking a salary from from the company, there's certain ways to optimize that from your tax standpoint. So I think having a CPA who has experience with these early stage sort of issues, especially when it comes to C Corp versus LLC versus S Corp, I think all those things are really important. And I think actually San Diego is pretty good in that we have a diverse marketplace when it comes to professional services on the CPA front. There are quite a few sole practitioners or small CPA shops that I know are excellent. And I think it's just a matter of going out and, kind of asking other professional services providers that you may have a relationship, or business advisors. I have CPAs I recommend. CPAs recommend me into deals. There are also, folks that are, kind of regular members of boards of directors or investors who have CPAs they like to work with. So I think that's the best way to find someone is kind of word of mouth referrals. But they're also, I know, there's Google and there's other stuff out there.
Yeah,
So.
the question you raise is actually one of the things that we're working on as a community
Mhm.
is, and we've already started this list, and we'll make sure you get it, is a central point of suppliers, partners that have been worked with in the community, right? They're
Yeah,
like, you don't need to go on Yelp and look for 5 stars. Like everybody, if they're on this list, we've already vetted them, and people in the community work with them, and they're validated. So,
that's
um,
great.
we'll work on getting that to you. I don't know if CPAs are on there, but that list exists for anybody that is interested in finding that.
Yeah, and that's an important tool because you want to know what other people's experience were with them, right?
Yeah,
They may know the tax code inside and out, but they may be unreachable, or they may be difficult to deal with, or they may be extremely expensive. And
yeah,
so, based on kind of what's important to you, I think having a list like that is, kind of tells you someone's experience with them who's in a similar situation to what you may be in,
yep,
is vitally important.
yep. No, that's great. Um, so keep the questions rolling, guys. I did have a question, Anthony. How have you found early stage, whether it's LLC or C Corp, do a option allocation and granting structure that is more mathematical and methodical instead of like, oh, at this stage you get X%? Like, have you found good tools there that you think are equitable and fair instead of just, because a lot of people just going on Reddit and like, what is the right shares that I get for this stage employee? And they ask like a couple friends. And I've always thought that was kind of a pretty dated way of doing it. Have you found companies do it a better way?
Yeah, no, definitely. There are lots of options out there. It goes back a little bit to what we discussed earlier, that if you have outside investors, they may have ideas as well, right? And they may want to impose their ideas on you as to what,
Yeah.
what the pool size should be, what every size of grant should be, who should be getting those grants, C-level executives versus sales folks or development folks. But it's also good for you to have your own position on that, I think. And there are some really good tools out there. I've actually read something recently on Medium about kind of a rule of essentially, I think it was every year, thinking about 10% of the company being kind of going out, and
Yeah.
then allocating that 10%. And so that seems to be obviously a very rote way to do it, but
Yeah.
it based on my experience actually, and thinking about some of the companies we work with, it actually has worked out that way in practice, whether they decided to do it
Yeah.
that way or not. And that means basically, if you're growing at a certain rate, you may have to divide that 10% among more employees, but that just means the earlier stage employees are getting more equity, and they may be more important. They may be higher up. It may be your chief marketing officer or your chief financial officer who is, ultimately splitting the first 10% with the other C-level executives. And then down the line, if you hire, VPs or, other sales kind of reps, stuff like that, they're getting a smaller piece of the same pie, but
Yeah.
that may be, I think, essentially how it works. It's a good question though. I think there are also, I think some of the other service providers who are out there have done a pretty good job giving guidance. I have a lot of clients who use Carta, and I think Carta has some great
Yeah.
resources when it comes to questions like these. I like it. I think it's a great platform. It actually saves
Oh my gosh.
money. we
Saves
would
so much
be
time.
we'd be helping them maintain the cap table. We'd be helping with all the issuances, and they're actually much cheaper. Not to put myself out of a job, but
Yeah.
they're actually much cheaper than having a lawyer do those things. So I tend to like
I
uh,
agree.
tools like that for issuances. So, and that's not for every company. I think it's once you get to a certain level of complexity on your cap table, it makes sense to use it. If it's just a few people to begin with, there's not much to do it. But
Yeah.
yeah, so the tool I mentioned is Carta. It's
And do it early. It's really expensive to change after you're like 2 rounds in because they charge a lot. But if you're starting on it fresh, it's really affordable and cheap. And it's
yep.
called eShares now. It's called Carta.
Yes.
It's a great platform. Um, Anthony, can you speak on, if you are raising funds, and I learned this the hard way, but how often do you see founders or entrepreneurs pushing back on option pool size before the
Mhm.
round, right? Because this is kind of like a little hack, I feel like,
Yeah.
any investor's going to say, hey, you got to have a robust option pool,
Mhm.
which is it's a legitimate and true. But if you have your capital strategy and you're only raising enough for 18 months, only have an option pool for 18 months. Don't have an option pool for 36 months because you're going to raise again, right?
Yep.
And so pushing back on that and being sophisticated and pushing back on that, I don't see a lot of founders doing that. And it's just dilution at an early stage.
Yep. Yeah, it's important. I think so. I had a recent deal where we actually came to the conclusion that the right amount for the initial option pool for that company was 20%, which is a pretty high percent, right? But it's just that that company was how should I say it? It was personnel heavy, right? So we needed the ability to issue the equity incentives within the first year, actually, probably almost all of the 20%
Yeah.
just to hire people. And I think that was a specific situation, but in that case, the founder was very adamant about it. Basically, that was a term that was not negotiable with any of the investors, and ultimately, the investors ended up accepting it with some, obviously some kind of caveats around the investor being able to have the ability to weigh in on grants,
Yeah.
thinking about the timing of grants, all those things, and then obviously signing off on the form of the plan, the option agreement. There's a lot that goes into, if you think about it, it sounds pretty easy to issue options, but there's a lot that goes into the background of it. And I think, you can come up with a number for the pool, and then the pool can be, carved in different ways, right? That same pool can be used to compensate founders through additional, equity
Yep.
incentive. It can be used to compensate new employees. It can be used to compensate board members or advisors or consultants, or you could use it as essentially compensation for other third-party services. So that pool, the size is important, but also how you think about all of the different recipients is important, right? And at what point those recipients are coming in is important as well. So, and then, honestly, if you have a really solid board, then you're making very considered decisions about it. It's not, kind of issuing options willy-nilly. You do have a program, you do
Yep.
have kind of a policy around it. And I think having the pool size, if even if it's a smaller pool, a 5% pool or a 8% or a 10% pool, having the thoughtfulness around how to issue it could actually make it much more effective than a 20% pool. So, yeah.
Yep. I think it's just relevant, especially in CPG, is this
Mhm.
industry is so capital intensive,
Yep.
and if you do well, it's dilutive over time, even if you do
Mhm.
well. And so just being mindful of, incentivizing the employees, but also the dilutive effect of that in total.
Yep.
And I tend to lean on the incentivizing the employees
Mhm.
with this idea of, like, at the end of the day, if this is all successful, we want to all look at each other at a table and say, congratulations, this is great. And everybody's high-fiving, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Um, that's what it's all
Yeah,
about.
that sounds like a pretty democratic or balanced way to issue stock. Some companies are very rigid about, okay, only C-suite executives are getting options, no one else, and they're going to take the bulk of it. And
Yeah.
there may be a good business reason for doing that. And ultimately, that's what, from a legal standpoint, if this were ever to go to court and the court were to say, your business judgment in deciding this was wrong, I think it really comes down to what was the board's basis for deciding what it did, and having that well documented is important. So that's
You're scratching at something which is so exciting, which is 409A valuations, but
yes.
I don't think people want to get into that. Any other questions from the team or the group around whether it's capital strategy or corporate structure, a lot of B Corp stuff?
Great question so far. I'm really, really excited. I didn't have to go, spew on for any period of time on stuff that I wanted to talk about. This is great.
Yeah, Anthony, I love your take on the capital markets in general, right? From dry powder to venture and CPG. I know you touch a decent amount of venture and CPG, but where's the venture head right now, right? Cautious, optimistic, bullish, bearish. Where is the zeitgeist?
Yeah, I think it's honestly pretty bullish. There is a lot of dry powder, as you mentioned. Even though it seems like deals are, I mean, basically, even in San Diego, you look at deals that are being announced, and it's one a day or one every couple of days. And you're like,
Yeah.
this is an amazing pace. I think there is still a lot of dry powder on the sidelines that's waiting to be deployed. I think people are getting a little bit more confident that some of the uncertainty around the kind of macroeconomic situation is calming down a little bit. Especially, I think in California, I wouldn't say we're insulated, but we do have a good kind of support for our businesses here generally when it comes to consumer demand and those sorts of things. So I'm hearing confidence from most of the investors that we work with, confidence enough that they're going out and issuing term sheets and at pretty frothy valuations still. I
Yeah.
think that's the thing is like for a good company, you're still going to get a pretty nice valuation. They're not trying to nickel and dime people at this
Yeah.
point, not looking at distress. Obviously, there are distress plays out there, which is interesting too. And they
Yeah.
sometimes go together, right? You think about in the last year or so, I had some investor clients who were looking at buying assets from like the soup plantation chapter 11 and looking at potentially, taking that IP and turning it into something interesting, or, something similar to that. And I think there are a lot of opportunities like that still, but that just goes to show there's kind of two parts of the market. One is, really good high quality companies are still getting great valuations,
Yep.
a lot of investor attention. And then there are distressed opportunities, which are always going to be there. And it just so happens some of the distress has been accelerated a little bit with, the what we've experienced in the last year, which has been, retail being hit very hard, folks being out of jobs for a long time. And so there are opportunities at both ends of the spectrum and dry powder at both ends of the spectrum. So I think there's a big role to be played from private capital coming in, to help accelerate growth in companies that are well positioned and also to help rescue or, save assets that are in a tough position as well and kind of extract value from them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited about it. I think that just means, there's work for us on both sides. And I've been, at the beginning of pandemic, I was a little bit worried about, clients just sitting back and
Yep.
kind of being a little bit scared about moving forward on anything, but it's been kind of the opposite. People are very excited their companies about, and even more excited in some ways because, they can essentially see the opportunity, in a unique way that this company's been able to kind of survive and even
Yeah.
thrive in this circumstance. So
Well, I never really thought about the connection between how the pandemic has not hit our CPG industry as hard as some other industries. And so maybe that actually allocates capital more to this industry from
yep.
so, I think there's compounding benefits to it. What are you seeing in the market for early stage? I know that it all depends on structure, so I hate the multiple conversation, but on a net revenue or on a gross revenue multiple, what are you seeing?
That's a tough question to ask me. I really don't. I never weigh in on those things. It's always.
You're into the legal stuff. You're like,
Yeah, that's right. No one ever asked me that question. That's
yeah,
yeah. I think it's like I said, I think it's still pretty frothy when it comes to multiples. I think there are because there are so many deals happening, there are a lot more comparables out there. So it's interesting. I think you can kind of use those to
yeah,
gauge where your company might be in a raise. Obviously, not every company is identical, but there are, I think, more comps out there now, and there's actually more information about kind of even private deals out there now. So I think that's all helpful in kind of maximizing the ability of companies to say, hey, we just saw this deal close a month ago, and we think we're just as well positioned as they are, if not better, and our financials are just as well positioned, if not better. So I'll answer the question that way. I don't have a number, but I think it's still pretty robust.
you just don't want to put your clients in a weird spot. I get it.
Yeah, that's right. You'll be able to see from my bio who I work
Pay
with.
these multiples.
They would kill me.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody got some thoughts for Anthony here as we enter into a nice sunny Friday in San Diego?
Beautiful.
I mean, I could go on, but I really want this to be for the community. So, if you guys, if you feel like you guys are full and have had your moment and don't have any other questions, but I guess Anthony, I don't want to offer this without your approval.
Yeah.
But if you guys do have questions, reach out to Anthony. He's free and he can help guide for a bit. And this is part of the benefit of the community, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I love being in San Diego. I think it's it's just big enough that you can still meet new people and interesting people, but also small enough that you tend to run into some of the same people over and over again. And I want to be someone who's thought of as a valuable resource. And so don't ever hesitate to reach out. I think, my email is on my website. I think my cell phone number, if you shoot me an email, is in my signature.
Yeah.
So I answer text messages, I answer cell phone calls. I'm pretty much always available to my wife's dismay.
No, but from what I've seen, Anthony, you have a good balance in life. You're not fully engaged. So you do balance it well, which is
I
good.
try.
All fun.
I think that's the beauty of living and working in a place like San Diego is like I think that's the mindset a lot of people take, which is it's nice to be part of that a community that thinks that way.
Yeah. We had a question from Zach around any exposure to working with family businesses and that dynamic and how that all shakes out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So some of the most I would say rewarding sell side opportunities or kind of company side opportunities that I've had in terms of raising capital have been with family businesses because there's either a generational change or something going on where the families run the business for a long time, but they're looking finally they built their brand or they built what they have basically spent their whole life's work kind of coming up with, and they trust you to come in and help them kind of shepherd to the next level. And I think that's a very special relationship, honestly. And I take it very seriously when someone trusts you to kind of help them think through the next step. And I do work with folks on both on the company side and the investor side who love kind of those sorts of situations. I think some investors shy away with it. They don't want to deal with family dynamics, or they want something that's a little bit more how should I say it? Kind of a partnership between people who aren't related. But I think some investors do think it's especially on the brand side, having that consistency over time, those relationships is pretty important. So I have done it. I think it's like I said, some of my most rewarding clients and engagements have been with family businesses. And I think most of the investors I work with have, it's kind of a non-factor when it comes to how they think about it. If it's a well-run business and everyone's doing what they need to be doing, and there's not like 5 people on the payroll who are doing nothing. I think that's what they care about. So
If you guys, I think it's a worth notable mention, and I only realized this through doing more of these, is that in San Diego we have Perfect Foods, which is the definition of family business, 8 siblings involved, and
nice.
the Bitch and Sauce Story, which we just had last week, and that's also like cousins, brothers, aunts, uncles, anybody's willing to help was involved in that, and both flourishing success. So
Yep.
there is credence to having family and business, and I think there's perseverance there that a lot of brands don't do if you just kind of have a partnership. So
Yeah, that's an intangible that they can bring to the table. I'm actually really excited, not to go off topic, but about the Jimbo's discussion. So I'm
yeah,
glad that
it's
was on the calendar.
gonna be great.
We're big fans. The
Yeah,
store here is amazing. We're in Del Mar. It's amazing.
yeah, yep, that's awesome. Well, thank you for that, Zach. Anybody else? I don't want to keep people on their Friday here, so if you guys feeling we've covered the topics enough for you guys to start the weekend, fantastic. And like I said, reach out to Anthony if you guys have questions, and I'll be sure, Christina, to distribute that list for the resources. And you guys, if you guys aren't on the Slack channel, I encourage you to join the Slack channel, and hope you guys are getting value out of what we're offering here. And also give feedback. Like, what do you guys want to see more of in these office hours? This is built for you guys particularly. All right, Christina had another question. Can you please talk a little bit about needs to be in your articles, or what needs to be in your articles of incorporation? That seems like a pretty open question, but Anthony, if you can scratch on articles, Christina, if you're filing articles, is great timing.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a couple of different ways to think about it. It really drives to what stage you're in. So if you're early on and it's just you or just you and your co-founder, they can be pretty simple. I mean, basically as simple as 2 or 3 pages, basically setting up the corporation, how much stock you're going to issue, who appoints the directors, and then basically some statutory requirements that really don't affect you on a day-to-day basis regarding identification of directors, those sorts of things. That's basically bare minimum. If you're prepping for investment, or if you're prepping for potentially issuing additional classes of shares for whatever reason, whether it's non-voting shares to to folks that you're hiring on, or preferred shares to investors, it gets a lot more complicated. And that's when I would say, you probably need a lawyer at that point. If you're doing an amended and restated articles of incorporation,
Yeah.
I'm working on one right now. It's about 60 pages, which is, it's complicated. There are formulas in there regarding, dilution. There's all kinds of stuff, and it's, working your way through it can take, quite a few hours. But at a very early stage, they're basically a few statutory requirements, really thinking about what your initial capital structure is. So if it's just common stock, it's pretty easy. basically how many shares you're authorizing and want to have issued. That kind of sets the framework for your CAD table, and then that's pretty much it. I mean, it's basically who your registered agent is. That's pretty much it. So
Great. Zach, you should definitely connect with Anthony. I think you saw that. So like you said, just you can Google him, and his email is readily available. And so, congrats on everything, and hope it works out well, and you're in good hands here. Well, great. Everybody, thank you for popping in here. And as I said, please give feedback if on what you guys want to see in the future and on this. And we're here to serve you guys. And appreciate you guys hopping on. And Anthony, so much appreciation. I always love chatting with you. It's great. And look forward to probably seeing you next month.
likewise, no, this was great. I
Yeah.
hope this is the beginning of a discussion, and obviously, like Matt said, I'm available, and feel free to. So I'll just give my email out now if you want. So it's aarnold@btlaw.com. It's should be pretty easy to remember.
Yeah. Arnold@btlaw.com.
Yep.
Perfect.
All right. Hope everyone has a great weekend. It was great meeting you all.
All right, guys. Everybody have a great one. See ya. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, buddy. Bye.
Okay.